Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you and welcome to Leader Freak Public Economics Hub. If you've been reading the news recently, you heard about Kenya's debt crisis, and how unsustainable it is. You have seen the urgency with which the media has reported on Kenya's debt. And today, I'm here to do a data-driven analysis of Kenya's debt, and I'll be looking at data that the Central Bank of Kenya provides on its website. That data runs from September 1999 to April 2025. And so I have the honor of analyzing what the past four presidents have done, starting with Moi between 1999 and 2002, then Kibaki, Uhuru, and now Ruto up to April 2025. Before we dig in, I just wanted to remind you of Leader Freak Public Economics Hub, and you can check it out at leaderfreak.com. It exists to ensure that we analyze important economic documents. So think Vision 2030, think sessional paper number 10, these key documents that have defined Kenya's economics. We also look at policies that have been made. We also look at data, like in this case, and analyze it. In other words, we want Kenyans to have a very thorough understanding of where the economy is. Why is this important? Because economics affect us. It affects our daily lives. Many of us who have gone through school and are graduates are really struggling to find jobs. Many of us who are employed are really struggling to get by, to survive. The cost of living is going high. So many challenges. And I believe that a thorough understanding of economics help us ensure that we scrutinize every public official, politician. We filter through their empty promises and see what works and what doesn't. And we can also hold them to account because we have good understanding of economics. I will not bore you further. Let's get into it. Let's start with the numbers. We can see that Kenya's debt stands at a whopping 11.5 trillion as of April 2025. That is from 503.6 billion. Think about the parable of the talents. I believe that is what it was. Jesus talks of these three individuals who were given money or talents. Let's call them that, to take care of. There's one who was given 5 and was able to double it. Another one was given 2 and there's one who was given 1. Think of what Jesus would have felt if he gave Kenyans 503 billion talents and they returned 11.5 trillion 25 years later. The master will be so proud. Except this is not talents. It's not what we have earned. It is debt. It's what we have borrowed. The master will be so disappointed and so frustrated. You were given money and you borrowed even more and more. I think of debt as a whole. And in 1999, our whole was 503.6 billion deep. Now it's a whole crater, 11.5 trillion. Our debt to GDP ratio now is 68%, which is not bad. Many countries have debt to GDP significantly higher than that, including Japan, which we will look at. And Japan's debt to GDP ratio is 226. So that is much, much, much bigger, 226%. But in Kenya's case, we will see why this number, small as it may look, is really bad news. And debt is not just about the numbers, it's about what it means. So our debt has grown 22.9 times, 22.9 times. So that is a very fast rate of growth for debt and for anything really. I was looking at the Kenya's financial statement, and we are going to spend 54% of the revenue raised in interest payments. You're paying interest. Can you imagine? More than half your salary goes to pay not debt, but interest on debt. And then only 46% is left for other essentials. In our case, the government is only going to use 46% of its revenue for schools, healthcare, and infrastructure. The rest is paying interest. And so What does the government do in that case? It doesn't have enough money for schools, not enough money for healthcare, not enough money for infrastructure. It's going to borrow even more. So you can see how this can become very easily and very quickly a vicious cycle. Let's look at the presidents. President Daniel Torotich Arap Moi. You can see debt, sustainable, easy borrowing, not a problem. Kibaki, life is okay. Those who were born in 2000, they were in primary school, were listening to songs like Merimela Kipenzi. Debt was growing, but the economy was also growing. Our debt to GDP ratio is about 45 to 50%, not a problem. And when these Merimela kids get into high school, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta steps in and he presses on the gas. Bam. And Uhuru borrows and borrows and borrows some more. And when we thought we had seen it all, then comes Ruto, who makes Uhuru look like a joke. And we see Ruto continues at a very fast pace of borrowing, which we'll see in the next slide. But in 2024, something interesting happens. Our debt reduces for the first time. For the first time in 23, 24 years. The reason our debt reduces is because our currency appreciated. Think about it this way. If the dollar or if the shilling trades at 100 shillings to the dollar, which means if I give you $1, you can change it to 100 shillings. If I give you $2, you can change it to 200 shillings. So if you borrow money from me and I give you $2, and today the exchange rate is 100 to the dollar, and then tomorrow the exchange rate becomes 50 to the dollar. That means you can pay me 50 times 2, which is 100. When you borrowed 200. But when you're paying 100 because the currency has appreciated. That is what happened to Kenya in this case. So the real value of our debt decreased significantly. But that did not last because immediately after, William Ruto continued with the borrowing spree. But this was a significant appreciation, currency appreciation. It was quite huge, imagine, because the shilling was trading at around 165, very, very low. And then it appreciated to about 130 shillings to the dollar, which was quite a significant change. I remember following that. Let's look at the presidents a little more. So Moi, between 1999 and 2002, added 126 billion. He was borrowing 38 billion per year on average. In 1999, our debt is 503 billion. Okay. Our debt to GDP ratio is 60%. So manageable borrowing, nothing to worry about too much. Then comes Kibaki, Emilio, Mwai. He adds 1.165 trillion over the course of 10 years, about 113.78 billion per year. And that is faster than Moi's 4 years, so at 2.9 times faster. So we can see that the debt is increasing, but it's proportional to the economy because the economy was also growing. Then comes Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. I think Uhuru realized that his father's pictures were printed on the money and decided to press the accelerator gas because to him it did not matter. It appears because he added 6.79 trillion, was borrowing at the rate of 726.6 billion a year on average. It was faster than Kibaki 6.4 times. That was the inflection point. If the debt was growing slowly going up slowly, during Uhuru's time, it accelerated quite significantly. And then came in Ruto, who made Uhuru look like a joke by ensuring that in 31 months, he had already added 2.8 trillion to Kenya's debt. I wonder where we'll be after the 10 years elapse. And he's borrowing at a rate of 1 trillion per year. Remember, Kibaki added 1.1 trillion in 10 years. Ruto has 1 trillion in 1 year. And so for 31 months, Ruto had borrowed more than twice what Kibaki borrowed in 10 years. I want that to sink in. In 31 months, Ruto had borrowed more than twice what Kibaki borrowed in 10 years. And our debt to GDP is at 68%, and Ruto's debt growth rate has been the fastest so far. And this is just a breakdown of that, and we can see that from very low, we have 39 billion a year, 38 point something, so 39 rounds off to 39, and then goes higher to 114 during Kibaki's time, it goes to 727 during Uhuru's time, and 1 trillion under Ruto's time. Ruto is setting a record in more ways than one. And Moi's debt cumulatively from 1999 to 2002 grows by about 25%. Kibaki grows that by 185%. And then Uhuru grows that on top of that by 360%. So Uhuru has already grown the debt too much. And then Ruto in a few months adds 32%. It will be interesting to see how far we go with this. But we are paying so much in interest. And that, as we will see, is not very good. So the biggest problem in Kenya is that Kenya is broke. I don't know if you have been broke, you really understand how Kenya feels. Kenya is earning very little because it's only earning 60.7% of its GDP compared to South Africa, which is raising 25 to 28%. So in other words, Kenya could raise up to 5.5 trillion in extra revenue. And so Kenya is broke. It's not just earning enough. It's one of those countries that if we were to compare it to just people generally, it doesn't have a good job because job is not paying Kenya very well. But that is just on a light note. Kenya needs to do more to raise a little more revenue and match South Africa and many other countries that are doing better. Comparatively, in 1999, we were raising about 18.4% of our GDP in revenue. So today we are even raising less because a percentage of our GDP. And then the fiscal deficit was about near balance, close to zero fiscal deficit. And now it's about 5.6%. The number of active taxpayers has increased. It has grown from 5.1 million in 2018-2019 to 9.87 in 2024-2025, according to KRA, which is good, significant, but still, as a percentage of GDP, we are not raising a lot of money. So Kenya needs to expand its tax base. We need to grow the tax base and also encourage compliance. Because if we have more people paying taxes and yet the percentage to GDP is not measuring up, then that means that there is a problem somewhere. People need to comply more with taxes so that we can raise revenue. And that is important because remember, at the end of the day, whether it's through taxes, whether it's through debt, first, Kenya must continue working, must continue operating. Students need to still go to school, hospitals need to function. And whichever way we finance, at the end of the day, it's Kenyans who pay. So we might not like taxes, which is absolutely fine, or we might not comply with taxes, but we give that burden to the few taxpayers and they're going to pay for it, even debt itself. So we need greater compliance if we are to help Kenya get out of the revenue problem. When Kenya is broke, it means that Kenyans are broke. Some reasons. So some reasons why we find ourselves where we are. So after the 2008 financial crisis, the interest rates were very low. So the government decided to borrow because when interest rates are low, governments borrow. And then we have ambitious development agenda. The standard gauge railway from Mombasa all the way to Naivasha. The road network expansion. Think Thika Superhighway. Think the expressway and many other roads. And then we have the Mombasa port that has been developed. And then there's the Lapsset corridor. So a lot of infrastructure, heavy infrastructure development projects. While this is all happening, we are doing all these great projects, our revenue is not increasing. We are still raising just 16% of GDP in taxes, as mentioned earlier. So how do we fill the gap? By borrowing and borrowing. And then the fiscal deficit remains high at 9% in 2017. that was unsustainable. That was the highest fiscal deficit we had seen. And so right now it has reduced a little bit, but it's still high at 5.6 as of 2025 April. This is how our debt looked like. 25 years ago, 36% of our debt was domestic, meaning it was coming from local banks, from Kenyan banks and Kenyan people. A century later, 25 years later, domestic debt is bigger than external debt. So you can see how the pie changed. And now, 46% of our debt is external debt. It's not the biggest, but quite big, which means we are exposed to currency risk. If our currency appreciates relative to the currency that we borrowed in, good for us. But if vice versa happens and there is volatility, then our debt could increase quite significantly. So if the shilling weakens, then our debt, the real value of our debt increases. I thought we should compare Kenya and Japan, and I saw that it was interesting that the letters follow each other, J, K. But that is as far as we follow each other, because the debt to GDP in Japan is over the roof, 226%. In Kenya, it's only 68%. But how come Japan is in a better position than we are as far as credit goes? Japan has a very high credit rating according to three credit rating agencies, Moody's and others, and Kenya, not so well. The borrowing cost for Japan, for every $100 billion that the Japan borrows, they only pay $2 billion in interest. For every $100 billion that Kenya borrows, it pays $12 billion in interest. Japan, think about that. And this is what I call the poverty punishment. If you're poor, you're punished with higher interest on debt, which is quite an irony, but that's just the way the world of credit and finance works. Risk versus return. If they assess you to be a risky borrower, then they're going to charge you more. And it turns out that if you are a poorer country or even a not so wealthy individual, they will always charge you a higher interest. I believe if Elon Musk was to get a loan, he'll probably pay very little interest compared to someone like myself. That said, we can continue comparing Japan to Kenya. Let's start with the debt composition. 88% of Japan's debt is from its citizens, its banks. In Kenya, it's only 54%. This is a significant improvement, but comparatively speaking, it's still lower. This means that Japan, if things get really bad for Japan, it can just print more money and pay its debt because most of its debt is owned it's owed in Japanese yen. Kenya, we can take care of 54% of that. And the rest we have to, if it's really a serious crisis, then we have to default. And defaulting is never good because that means that the interests on debt go even higher because the government, no one will want to lend a government that defaults. So you have to give people a high interest when you default. And when you default, it just creates a lot of chaos. So no one wants to print money to pay debt because that will cause inflation. But if things get really bad, Japan is in a better shape than Kenya. And I thought I should add our beautiful flags. And I think we share red and white as well. So not just the color, the letters following each other, JK, but also our flags have some similar colors. The current account surplus. So when Japan does business with all other countries, the net amount of money it gets is 194 billion. So the amount of money that comes in Japan after business with all countries, exports, imports, investments, it's 194 billion. In Kenya, after business with all other countries that we do business with, we lose 1.5 billion. So every year we are existing, we are losing money. Every year Japan is existing, it's earning money from the rest of the world. Japan is earning 194 billion, we are losing 1.5 billion from the rest of the world. You can also think about the tax base. think about the tax base, we see that Japan has a very broad tax base. The people have high income individuals, so it's a high income country. So it gets more per person compared to Kenya, and that's not enough. It's getting at least 34% of its GDP from the revenue that it has raised. In Kenya's case, that is just 16%. So even though there's a lot to see on this page, Kenya has to work really hard to ensure that it's raising at least something higher than this. There's room for growth. That's what this means. I talked about this vicious cycle where you have high borrowing needs and then the interest rates are rising globally. So you're paying much more on your debt servicing. That means you cannot pay for other important things. So you have large fiscal deficits. And so that means you need to borrow more. And then because you have high borrowing needs and high interest, so the cycle continues. The cycle continues. You borrow and then you pay most of the money on interest. And so it means you cannot fund your school, so you have to borrow. When you borrow again, and then so we can get into this cycle that continues perpetually. And hopefully we do not trap ourselves there. What can we do just to cut inefficiency? It's easier said. Reduce recurrent waste. A lot of money goes on recurrent expenditure. Most of that is on debt payments, but there's also just a lot of projects that we do every year. We pay so much money. I think it was more than 80% of our revenue goes towards just keeping the lights on and the taps running, just for governments to continue existing, not new development projects, not nothing, just to keep afloat. So we need to reduce recurrent waste and prioritize high impact investments, investments that have the greatest return and opportunities to raise more revenue. We also need to restructure our debt. So if debt is maturing, we need to find a way of extending maturity, because when debt matures, you have to pay it back. For those of you who understand how government bonds works, if the bond is due, if it's 10 years, you pay interest for the 10 years. And then at the end of the 10 years, you pay the amount of money that is owed. So this the value of the debt. So if such a case happens and we are in as deep a trouble as we are, Kenya needs to find a way to renegotiate terms with lenders to extend maturities. But most importantly and urgently, and cannot be emphasized enough, Kenya needs to expand its revenue collection. Or else, if we have so much money leaving our country going to pay debt, going to pay interest, then we'll have fewer jobs, the public sector will freeze, we'll have higher inflation and prices, more debt money, and money supply, which just puts inflationary pressure on prices of things that we buy. You also end up having a weaker shilling. That means expensive imports become expensive. So that is also imported inflation, and our cost of borrowing becomes even higher. And we will be left with little money to fund public services. So think schools. You go to school, kids don't have books. You go to hospital, nurses are on strike. There's no medicine. They're not paid enough. The services are not as good as they can get. And then, worse than that, if you ask me, our children are born in debt. So every time a Kenyan kid is born, Kenyan child is born, they owe money already. I think if we were a serious country, our children should be born with something in their account. So a long journey to go, but there is a lot of strides being made, and I am always hopeful because I believe in Project Kenya. I know we can get far. So a few visuals, I'll not spend much time on this. This is just how the debt has changed. So domestic debt and external debt. The line at the top, the light blue one, was external debt, and you can see how it changed over time. And then during Kibaki's time, we see we had more domestic debt and less external debt. During Uhuru's time, there's a little reversal because Uhuru went to borrow money from China and others to fund the SGR and the expressway. But we can see that change, and then somewhere in just after 2024, again, we had more domestic debt. And this is because there was a decline in there was a decline in external debt because of the currency appreciation as well. That contributed to that shift just right after 2024. You can see it's quite a dramatic shift. And this is how debt grew year over year. Most time it's high because 1999 is our base year and it's just from September. So this figure here requires a little explanation. But the interesting part is Uhuru's time. Almost everything is red. And as you can see, red here is above average growth. So Uhuru recorded above average growth. He's the one who is pulling the average up. And Kibaki is mostly blue, so below average. So it is quite a change from Kibaki to Uhuru. We see in 2024, I've talked about this already, but there's a decline in debt for the first time. And that is partly due to the currency appreciation. So that's it about Kenya's debt. That's where we stand. That's where we are. It's not looking good. It's not sustainable. I just wanted to ask you to subscribe so that when I prepare the next analysis, you will be able to find it, or it will find you wherever you will be. And until next time, thank you.